Blog Talk Radio.
All right. Welcome to Morris Live 100. I'm your host, Tarhaka Amana El Bay. And today, this morning, part one on contracts and your identity. What this is a redo from the broadcast that we done last night. I ended up having some tech difficulties. We decided to scrap that show. But the information is so important that I decided to come on and redo it this morning. I'm going to try to put in a 3-hour broadcast before it's time to go in a meeting. So I'm going directly into the commercials. Y'all hold your hat. We'll be right back. The greatest move you can make beginning in 2022 is to move out of the public and into the private. That's how you get rid of student loans, child support, mortgages, foreclosures, and all this kind of business. Go to TarhakaDebtElimination.org. That's TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Fill out my Contact Us form by leaving your email address, and I'll rush my free report straight to your email box. Our economy is in shambles today for people who insist on living in the public. Move into the private. Make an easy transaction. Go to www.TarhakaDebtElimination.org. That's TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Fill out the Contact Us form, and I'll rush you my free report. Okay, now we're talking about contracts, and it's one thing you have to really understand about contracts. Contracts are designed to benefit the individual that created the contract. I'll say that again. The contract is designed to benefit the individual that created the contract. If you're signing a contract or somebody giving you a contract to sign, that contract is designed to benefit them. Now, when you go get a credit card, or if you're going to get you a new phone, or if you're going to open up a new bank account, whatever you're going to do, they want you to sign a contract. Everything in America operates on a continuous series of contracts under what's commonly referred to as contract law. We're going to deal with your identity, your story, and we're going to discuss these contracts, because the problem has been we've been presented by everybody else's contract instead of creating our own contracts and sending them the other way. And one that I highly recommend when you learn how to do that, and this is what we deal with when you deal with targeted elimination. We show you how to formulate your own contract. We show you the proper use of an affidavit and when you need it, and how to send it. We deal with all these things. But right now, the first thing I want you to do is pay close attention to this first segment that I'm going to play for you. Is very, very important for you to understand this in regards to your identity and your story on this land that they're calling the United States of America. That's what they call it. Okay? Yeah, hold on a minute.
While speaking at a formal gathering somewhere off the grid at a discreet location, just after his return from crossing the waters, Malcolm X revealed some very vital, unconventional details on what Negroes, or rather African Americans, were truly considered to be as a nationality of race prior to being called or labeled a Negro.
Aborigines, which means what? Black folks. You never find a white aborigine. Aborigines are called natives, or they're always dark-skinned people. You and I are aborigines, but you don't like to be called an aborigine.
Malcolm X stated that the rock landed on us after he returned across the waters because he learned new things. He learned that the rock had truly landed on us and that we were from these lands. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. also stated in his I Have a Dream speech that we are held in exile in our own homeland.
The Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land.
Now we have a lot of scholars out there, and individuals are missing the point. How can you be held in exile in your own homeland without it being your own homeland? The tens of millions of black Americans, or rather Indians, who disappeared in 1492 did not all die in the Holocaust inflicted within America. Hundreds of thousands were shipped to Europe and Africa as Indian slaves. The whole slave trade story was given to all of us in reverse. A mass colony of Africans were not shipped from Africa to America. The truth is that black Indians were shipped from America to Europe. They were then shipped from Spain to Africa as commodity for African resources. These black Indians, now mistaken as African Americans, were shipped back to America and classified as African slaves. This part of our history is what the school systems fail to mention in history programs. The American Society was an organization formed in 1816 with the purpose of transporting free African Americans, or rather Indian slaves, classified as Negroes back then, from the United States to settle on the west coast of Africa. During the decades, the society operated and transported more than 12,000 people to Africa, and the African nation of Liberia was founded. The term African American to refer to all black people was endorsed only since 1988, but was against the desires of the majority of black people. In fact, the term was endorsed by only 5 people, including Reverend Jesse Jackson and Ramona Edlin, leading the charge as a result of a gathering called the African American Summit, without the input of the majority of black people. Author Avis J. Smith went to the district court in Washington, D.C. to stand against this term, as well as against the notion that a small group of powerful individuals should be able to compel the masses into adopting it. The systematic destruction of the Native Americans, or rather Native Indigenous Aborigine people, and their way of life was not only one of recorded history's greatest tragedies, but as with the slave trade, deeply spiritually wounding to all involved. The utter decimation of their culture is one of the most shameful aspects of history, the extent of the damage still being downplayed and denied entry into textbooks and history lessons to this day. I'm just here to make you think.
All right, we back. Now, think about it. Just remember what Dr. Martin Luther King told you. He said you exiled in your own land, which means that you didn't come from somewhere else. You end up, keep in mind that this Sunday coming up, which my guest on my broadcast, the title of the broadcast would be Civil, not in India. He's saying civilization. Okay, so we're gonna deal with that. We got people who still insist that we came from somewhere else. Well, there are mounds in the United States. It's been there for hundreds and hundreds of years. And when the so-called Native Indians, so-called, came here, they put it in their record. Well, the mounds were here when we got here. We didn't build that. Somebody else built that. The people that was already here, they're the ones who did that. We're going to get down to this kind of stuff. We're dealing with what is the very foundation to bring contract to fruition. We're going to deal with some of that. And but let me go back and deal with the word excuse. The best definition that I ever heard in regards to the word excuse is as follows. An excuse is nothing more than the skin of a lie stuck with a reason. I'll say that again. An excuse is nothing more than the skin of a lie stuck with a reason. That's the best definition for an excuse that I've ever heard. You don't get a second chance to make a first impression. The greatest focal point in your life is when there's an opportunity to meet. Now, usually I'm going to go straight down the list on the switchboard with this information, but it is so important. Last time I was unable, last night I was unable to finish the whole thing in regards to the information that I want to bring out, but this time I'm going to do it by putting it at the top of the broadcast, and we'll cut out something else later on. But y'all hold on a minute. I want you to listen very, very careful to what this man has to say. Just pay attention. Just think about what he's saying, okay?
Tellingly, these scenes only begin to appear after the arrival of the Mongoloid. Conquest by the Mongoloids would explain why there are no Aborigines in the Americas today.
As long as they were on the reservation, they were Indian. As soon as they left the reservation, for whatever reason, they became free people of color. Then finally they became African Americans, same people. And you could see it in the lifetime of a single individual. This journey, it changes in classification. In classification.
Welcome to Real Black Consciousness Forum Podcast. This is Big VG on the check-in. Today's conversation, we're going to talk about some history. We're going to talk about the first Americans. We're going to talk about the original Americans. We're going to talk about the Aborigines. And we're just going to have like conversation about like what direction is this platform going, the Real Black Consciousness Forum Podcast. Like what direction are we going, right? We're going to have that conversation today. And we're going to, of course, we're going to produce a couple of sources. And, like all of our conversations, you can find the sources in the description box, right? You can click on the link. You can read it yourself in its entirety. You can fact check, when you have a conversation about history or whatever, it's always good to get the source from the person. You don't really want to take anybody's word for it. Because, truth be told, the American Negro is in the position that we're in because all we ever did was take folks' word. You know what I'm saying? And then, even with that, my goodness, talking about taking somebody's word, we took the devil's word for it. So whatever the devil say, many of us as American Negroes, we just regurgitate it, right? We don't dig in those crates, right? We don't dig in those libraries. We don't go back and get those older, earlier works that writers and explorers talked about. We just don't do it. But today is a new day. We're learning different things. We're reading different things. We're challenging the status quo, right? We just don't take it like, we got a couple of elders still hanging around to these old stories, right? These stories are outdated, but we holding on. But those stories is not going to last long, right? Here on Real Black Consciousness Forum Podcast, the direction that we go in is based on the comments. The comments is the engine and the fuel to the machine, right? So dig this, right? Going over the comments, there was a brother, and he was a little confused, right? He was like, when I listen to more recent conversations, it sounds like it's a little different, than your older conversations, right? It's almost sound like you're saying the opposite thing. So, of course, we're not here to confuse anybody. And with that being said, we're just going to, show up a particular position that we have on this platform. Now, here on Real Black Consciousness Forum Podcast, we have always taught from day one that the original man, the black man, was in the Americas prior to the slave trade and prior to Columbus even finding this place, right? He found the place with a whole bunch of people on it. dig that, right? When we say that, what tends to happen is that if you listen to our older conversations, right, we're kind of like, a lot of that is geared toward a community that call themselves, oh, we gave them the label, possibly. We call them the Aboriginal community, right? And these are a group of people that says, they're American Negroes. They say that we was always here, which I can connect with, right? But they do something a little different. They take a pivot. And they say that they are the original Indians. And when they say they are the original Indians, they do that in terms of like red Indian nations. So our people begin to call themselves Cherokee and Choctaw and Chickasaw and Cheyenne and Lakota and, et cetera, et cetera. This is what our people was doing. Now, in a sense, it's like, as we used to say on older conversations, it's look like, it's the Red Indian train is on the move. And it's a bunch of Negroes, American Negroes, they're trying to jump on that train. They're not doing that because this is something to do. What's actually happened is that, you got some voices, some guys, they're like YouTube famous, right? It's a Callaway guy. It's a guy we call Miho here, right? And there's a few others, and they say things such as, when I say they, I mean the Aboriginal community, saying things like the African slave trade never existed, it never happened, right? They say things like that. They say things like, Big Mama said she was Indian, right? They say things like that. They say things like, what else do these guys say? They do this. It's like they do what I call picture scholarship too. They kind of match up these pictures, right, with these ancient monuments, but check it out. At the end of it all, this is what's happening. In doing so, it's kind of like our people, they really don't explain to our people their position in this territory in the West that we call the Americas, right? So you can see maybe 450, maybe 500 Red Indian tribes. And if you tell our people that they're Indian and you don't do it properly, they will think that they are the real Indian from a Red Indian nation. So now you got American Negroes saying they're the original Cherokee. They're the original Choctaw. They're the original blase, 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 right? And then while they're doing that, they're kind of like throwing some cold water on the fact that they're mixed with the African. You see what I'm saying? So they minimize the African part of them, and they maximize what I would consider like the Red Nation, but they're doing it out of error almost. So if you listen to our older conversations, what we do, we try to bring the balance to, because that's what's going on, right? The truth be told, though, is that here on Real Black Consciousness Forum Podcast, we stand on and we show and prove that when it comes to the West, right, the American Negro is found in I'm talking about in large numbers, Central America, South America, and the islands, right? When we talk about the territory that we call the United States, it's California and Florida. Everywhere else is like small pockets, right? We could be found in the Carolinas. We can come all the way down from Virginia to the Carolinas, to Alabama, Tennessee, and then you got Mississippi, Louisiana. And then also, we're going to speak on later about Negroes in Canada. But we're talking about small pockets of people. Now, the thing about it when I say small pockets is that, dig this, the territory that we call the United States was never heavily populated by red people neither. This whole, that's the kind of like the issue I got with Jack Forbes. Like, he's a guy, he's a scholar, but he kind of paints this picture like there's millions and millions of people here. And there never was millions and millions of people in the territory that we call the United States. It just wasn't so, right? There were always pockets of people that was here. So how I see these Aboriginal guys is this. This is kind of like what they do that we totally disagree with on this platform. See, the American Negro was always here. You can't be a Cherokee, in my estimate. You can't be a Choctaw, in my estimate. You can't be none of these Red Indian tribes, in my estimate, because you, as the American Negro, was already here before they got here. So how did you become a Cherokee when you was here before them? So in all transparency, like if you listen to we kind of clown these guys a little bit. Well, we don't kind of, like we clown them a little bit. Like, yo, they running around saying the slave trade never happened. And they talking about, you know, I'm the real Choctaw. And I'm like, yo, you going from one oppressor to another oppressor. Yo, check this out. Let me say it this way, right? Let me say it this way. There was a part in our development as American Negroes where we were Christians, right? And I want to put a time on it. So I'm going to say, let's just say the early 1920s, right? The bulk of our people was converted to Christians, which is a Jewish religion, right? So to some respect, as an American Negro, if your religion is Christianity, you're underneath Jews. You may not see it that way, but you're underneath Jews, right? I don't care what color you make the Jews. You can do that whenever you want to do that. That's your business. But you're underneath Jews, right? Then came like a deeper sense of black consciousness, right? And it started to arise after the 1920s. And we wanted to be closer to self. We wanted to be closer to, like, it was a blackness kind of thing. It was a opening movement that we was kind of like spiritually and soulfully we're changing. In this change, many of our people became Muslims, right? Because we felt that Islam was our truest self, right? Islam is our truest self. And then before you know it, we start, bumping our head on the ground 5 times a day. We start praying to Mecca, you know what I'm saying? We start visiting Mecca. And what actually happened was we went from following these Jewish devils to running behind these Arab devils. And we feel like when we was running behind these Arab devils, we was closer to ourselves. But when you see our people jump from Judaism or Christianity to Arabism or Mohammedanism, that's pretty much what we was doing. And we felt like we was being closer to ourselves. In a sense, that's how I feel like the Aboriginal community is doing. They're not teaching our people that you were here before these Cherokees ever came around. They're not doing that. They're kind of doing something different. They got a different song and dance. Here on Real Black Consciousness Forum Podcast, we teach this like, yo, see, the American Negro, if you look at it in a sense, the black man is almost the last person here in the United States, right? It's a weird way we put it, though, because, see, first of all, when we talk about the Southeast Territory of the United States, and we're going to touch on Ohio today as well, the Midwest. See, the people that build the mounds, we call them mound builders. There's a sect of us with knowledge of self that when we talk about pre-Columbian American Negroes, we use the term mound builders. We are the people that built the mounds. That separates you from trying to be a person of a Red Indian nation, because even in their own tribal testimony, I don't care if they're Chickasaw or they're Cherokees or they Choctaw, they admit they did not build those mounds. They admit that it was another race of people that built those mounds already. When they got to these territories, those mounds was already there. These tombs was already there. These ancient relics was already there. They had nothing to do with that. They admit to that in their own tradition. What we're saying is that our people was the ones that was already here. That's it. That rubs a lot of our Afrocentric brothers the wrong way, because they got this thing in their head. They want everybody to be from Africa, right? It's like a very weird dynamic when it comes to them. Like everybody that's black, they got the same paint job as the African had to somehow come from Africa. But see, the original man, as the messenger taught us, the original man, we don't have a birth record. You can't put a date on us. You can't put a territory on us. We're the original people of the planet. We was always here. So it's kind of weird, and I use this example often. When it comes to like these Afrocentric guys, they do what we call like the thin air approach. So when we talk about the American Negro, he had to come from somewhere. He had to migrate from Africa there, because he couldn't just always be here. So we can show him, we can show and prove that archaeologists can date back Negro skulls for thousands of years in Brazil. And then, the Afrocentric guys say, well, he came from Africa. And then we could say, well, what about the Negroes in Solomon Island? So, well, he came from Africa. You say, well, what about the Negroes, the Aboriginals in Australia? Oh, well, he came from Africa. They got this little thing, they make everybody from Africa. And then they say, well, life started in Africa. And then in the very same breath, they'll tell you about taking an ancestry test. And I'm like, well, beloved, if everybody comes from Africa, what are we running around taking an ancestry test? We're going to all go back to Africa, right? So that means that the German is African, that the Swedish guy is from African, the Arab is really African, the Chinese guy is really African. No, they don't do that. They just put the African label on the people that got the same paint job as the African. But it's kind of unique because, see, the African Negro can come out of thin air. He don't have no origin. He just always was here. So I guess it's something about the water, the air, I don't know. It's something about that landmass that it can just produce the Negro out of thin air, the African Negro out of thin air. But the American, something about, I guess the air is different over here in the Americas. It just can't produce the Negro out of thin air, or Solomon Islands, or Australia, or wherever we are, right? When we talk about the Americas, though, many of us with knowledge of self, and this is different than the Aboriginals. We don't say that the American Negro was the only people here in the territory that we call the United States. There was never a landmass. There's never going to be a continent with one kind of people on it. Even when the explorers got here, when they talked about and they used the term Indian, they said the Indians came in all shades: yellow, brown, red, and black. We skip and overlook the black part all the time. No matter where he went, North America, South America, we skip the fact that there was Negroes here. We just overlook it. Not us. But this is how many of our Afrocentric brothers do. Right? So that's what's kind of going on in our earlier conversations up until now. Now we have more of a pivot because we was underneath the impression that all American Negroes knew there was no such thing as 100 million Africans coming over here on the slave trade. We just took that for granted. So, of course, this conversations that we have on this platform, it's geared by the comments. So we're just looking at the comments and we're like, yo, there's no way our people believe that now. So now this is the part of history that we're on. We talk about Negroes being in the Americas prior to the slave trade because the way it works when you do the knowledge, right, sound and right reasoning, we are a mixture of people, the American Negro. So the American Negro was always here. And then we have a slave trade that happens later. So the slave trade brought two different kind of groups here. It brought the East Indian here, and it brought the African here. But the way that they was pushing the slave codes on our people is that we couldn't mix with the so-called devil. We couldn't do it. We had to mix with other people of color. We was all in a melting pot together. So, I can procreate with a Mexican or a Red Indian or another American Negro or an African or East Indian. It didn't matter because we was all in the same melting pot together. All in the same mixing pot if you're from North, right? That's going to bring out a new species. So this is how I use that. I kind of flip it. I say, yo, the black man was technically the last person here, but at the same time, we was the first person here because we're new now. We're like gumbo now. So if Aboriginals come like, oh man, you original, and they start naming tribes, brother, or sister, even the elders always taught us that the Negro lost the knowledge of himself, of our religion. We stripped of our, our native tongue. We stripped of the knowledge of self. That only applies to the American Negro. Everybody else know who they are. The African know who he is. He come over, he already know. He ain't trying to figure nothing out. The red man know who he is. The Mexican know who they is. And we're going to have a conversation about the origin of the Mexican because it's not what you think, but that's going to come later. Everybody know who they are. They've never been stripped of anything, but the American Negro, he's confused. Even our brothers in the Caribbean, they know who they are.
Yeah. This is what we do here. This is telling you about the Garifuna people, how they came. They are combined of three cultures put together.
Okay.
The Caribbean, the Arawak Indian, and the African.
Okay.
Yeah. No, these African people are the pre-Columbus African before the slave trade began. No, these African people are the pre-Columbus African before the slave trade began. No, these African people are the pre-Columbus African before the slave trade began.
With the islanders, is that it?
Who are the carriers?
They're from South America, right? Or like the Guyanas?
Yeah.
The
Well, who are they?
I'm not sure.
You have to do your history, friend.
Yeah.
Where do you think the black people here come from?
I don't, I'm not sure. It's either like slave ship or they came from Africa, right? What do you think?
We've never been African.
Never?
We've never been African.
They don't really say on...
We're not really African. We are the carriers.
Right.
We are the carriers.
Maybe.
Our ancestors are the carriers. We man this, we control this, we inhabited this.
Yeah.
The sea was named for us, the Caribbean. We are the carriers. The Africans came after. The Africans came after. The Africans came after.
But the Afrocentric guys, they're very unique because what they do is when you start to learn about yourself, they act as an overseer to tell you where you're from. And they only tell you where you're from because you got the same pay job as them. So they give you this whole song and dance that you got an African ancestry. And beloved, believe me when I tell you, 99.9% of the time, when you see an American Negro talking about an African ancestry, he cannot point out anybody in his line that's from Africa. Not one single person, not one. America is his ancestral homeland, him or her. But it's just the weirdest thing. Like, it's weird, man. You just can't. It's weird. Now, the reason why that we give, the reason why we accept the slave trade is because, first of all, our big mamas can remember when they was here, Africans coming over and working on the plantation with them. That's number one. Number two, the slave trade is well documented. It's well documented. Nobody ain't faking up this stuff, and even here we talk about the Ancestral contract, right? So it's well documented about the slave trade. That's number two. Number three is this, right? Check this out. Being that it's well documented, being that many of our big mamas can remember the African coming over, the numbers that they give us, it's not mathematically possible for that to happen. Our brother W.B. Du Bois was the first one to go on record to provide a number. We know where he got that number from, right? He got that number. He didn't get that number from his big mama or somebody else. That we're going to one day call out the name of the person that gave him that number. And he ran around and touted, him, W.B. Du Bois, that 100 million Africans came over here on the slave trade, right? Even him telling you that and me that, he couldn't name one person in his line that came from Africa. It's like a reoccurring thing. The American Negro was telling other American Negroes that came from Africa. But the one that's telling you that, he can't point no African out of his family. See, that's the weird dynamic. And then you get another guy named Dr. Henry Clark. So if you go through the comments, you have guys on our platform, they're commenting about every single statement that we make. But nobody says nothing about how you go from 100 million Africans to a guy named Professor Henry Gates that all of a sudden he said it was 12 million. Nobody never comments on how did you miscount 88 million people. They're commenting about the intro, how you bring this, you made this, anything that's opinionated that I make, because this is a very opinionated platform. We having a conversation. They have something to say about that part. When we start talking about the documents and we're reading, they don't complain about the sources. They don't complain about W.B. Du Bois telling our people that 100 million Africans came over. They say nothing about that. They only want to point out when I start being opinionated, because we just have a conversation. And in a conversation, we all have our opinions. But let's talk about the 100 million Africans that came over. If we're going to drop a comment, let's talk about that. Let's not skip over everything else. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about it. How did you go from 100 million to 12? Like, how does that happen? Nobody says nothing about a miscounting of 88 million people. Let's stop and think about that. How can you miscount 88 million people? They never want to, these Afrocentric guys never want to talk about that. They want to make a comment about everything else we talk about but that. They skip that part every video. And we keep talking about it to somebody. Let's talk about it. We're going to keep talking about it to somebody address it. Nobody never addresses, right? But maybe that's a different story for a different day. Today, folks, we're going to talk about the Congressional record. And it's going to be the proceedings and debates. This is the 53rd Congress, the second session. This was produced in 1894, right? And we're just going to read a portion of it. Of course, we're going to put the link in the description bar. But we're going to start right at page 7687. And we're going to go down to, let's say, the second paragraph, right? And they're talking about the skulls that's found in the Americas. We're going to go up one paragraph, right? In a sense, we're going to start where it says, we are therefore quite confident that our material, so carefully collected and thoughtfully weighed, would not be cast aside and its usurped by the rash statements of hastily and incompetent investigators. While there should be so much speculation and uncertainty concerning the life of our aborigines is inexplicable to us. No question of equal importance could have been more easily determined have the early writers given as much impatience to mild exploration as is given at this present time, right? So right off the bat, this is a Congressional record, right? So we're talking about, you know, we're talking about the highest office of the land. We're talking about those that move and shake what happens in the country. This is a Congressional record, and they're having a conversation about the people of the Americas. And then they're talking about the mound builders and how they've been doing their research on it. And what they did was they're saying, yo, you know, we kind of put the people before our investigation. The people they're talking about is the Red Indians, right? That's what they're talking about. But we're going to go down to the next paragraph, and then we're going to skip the one in the middle. Conclusions. The skeletons of the brachycephalic people in the collection and examined from the Great and Little Miami valleys and those of Scioto in Ohio suggest that they were strong and well built. Let's skip down to the next paragraph. No skeletons of gigantic size were discovered, and there was but little doubt that the progenitors of the American race were in the height subject to the same variations in structure which are to be remarked among our recent tribes. Okay, let's stop. Let's build on that. So there was like this rumor that when you start looking at the mounds and everything like that, they was built by giants. Like, oh, some giants, people, some giants, you know, it's kind of, it's like a, it's a trend. When you see the Negro worldwide build anything, I don't care if it's the pyramids in Kemet, I don't care if it's great civilizations in Africa, or Brazil, or Central America, or the territory that we call the United States, they always make it spooky. Like, it was some giants, some outer aliens came from somewhere, and they built it and did this and did that. They're doing the same thing here. They're like, yo, it was giants that built it. But at this Congressional record, they're like, they just like, no, it wasn't no gigantic people built nothing. These is regular people that came and built that. But let's see in that estimate who the regular people was, right? So we're going to go down just a little bit where it says, right here where it says, we cannot overlook, right? And it says, we cannot overlook the fact that the crania and skeletons examined by us, many of them excavated by our own hands, approach somewhat the Negro in its anatomical characteristics. Let's stop. Congressional hearing. They're trying to figure out who built the mounds. Who came up? The Negro came up. Let's go on a couple of sentences, right? Because we're going to clear it all the way up with a couple of sentences down. It says, none of the characteristics of the Mongolian or the Mongoloid types are present in any of the Ohio crania which we have examined. Let's stop. Am I cherry picking? Does that sound like I'm cherry picking? Oh, brother VJ, man, you just be picking out certain parts. You cherry picking, brother. The American Negro ain't Indian. Now we're Indian. We got here before the Indians. Indians weren't even here yet. When we talk about black Indians, we use that in the truest sense of the word, like Aborigines or Aboriginal. That's like, you know, we was the first one here. Now, it can be one first, right? Dig that. You can only have one first Americans. We're never saying on this platform that we were the only people here. But if, you know, somebody trying to pull rank and a red man is running around in our conversations, you know, we just talking about our history. We're talking about our story. Unfortunately, you know, these conversations could be made easier because, see, we got black scholars that have been saying this for years, on top of years that the Negro was already here. But see, our people they're not like that. They don't want to hear from our people. Our people believe in devils. We like to hear the devil say it. Yo, if you ever check this out, if you ever hear an American Negro running around talking about he need to learn this from a credible source, I need to hear this from a credible source, he is really saying, I want to hear a devil say this. It's not real until a devil say this. That's what that means, right? So now you can't get any bigger devils than they sitting in the seat of politics in the United States on a congressional record, and everything's going to be documented, and this is what they're talking about. And then your people, the American Negro, they come up. So much so that they make a difference. No. These were Negroes in the mounds in Ohio. These were Negro skulls here, not Mongoloid. So ask yourself, who was here first? You can answer that yourself. Is that cherry picking? Now, this is why we have an issue with the Aboriginal community. How are you Cherokee, bro? Sis? How? You was already here before they got here. How? You running around, you know, you showing up at these folks' powwows and all this shit. Like, yo, you look bananas to us. Don't you know you was here before them? You don't know they jumping around with them loud color clothes on. You don't know none of that Siberian shit that they doing. You don't know none of that Palestinian shit that they doing. Did you catch what I said? I say it again. You don't know none of that Siberian shit that they doing. You don't know none of that Palestinian shit that they doing. Because these natives is a mixture of a couple of different groups. Uh-oh. You didn't think we knew that, did you? Yo, we're going to break this conversation down in the future. Why do you think the Palestinians, right, is so close to the Native Americans? You ever ask yourself that? No, you never did. You're running around, you know, you've been African. I don't get our people. You running around trying to be African so bad, you never just paid attention to the people that's right around you. You never paid attention to why certain people are so comfy and cozy with one another. You just never paid attention to it. We're going to have a good conversation about that. Because the messenger taught us, the people that call Indian, he taught us how they arrived here. Nobody walked on here. That whole stupid story about they came across the Bering Strait and they got to Alaska and they kept walking down through Canada and all the way through the United States and they kept walking all the way to South America and they got down to the backside of Chile and they populated everywhere in between. Man, that's the stupidest story I ever heard in my life, and American Negroes regurgitate that. But then again, what do you expect? This guy thinks 100 million Africans came over here on a slave ship in the 1600s. Oh, let's stop that. Coming back from the 1500s through the 1600s through the 1700s. When did they invent the steamboat? When they started putting an engine in these boats? 100 million, they just sailed over, huh? And you regurgitate that? We got a lot of work to do. No, beloved, some of these folks that we call the natives is Palestinians. Right? Look, let me share this with you, right? Because we just talking, right? Dig this. The messenger taught us that, he taught us about how the African came over, and there was 2 waves of Africans that came over. And in our next conversation, we're going to really sit down and chop that up, how that happened, right? And then we're going to back that up with the Library of Congress, because we got some testimonies some Negroes, grandmama that came on a boat from Africa. So we're going to have a good conversation about that. That red man, though, he came over
until a couple years ago. Last year, PLO came.
They came.
They came here. Yeah.
To Pine Ridge. The Palestinian Liberation Organization came to Pine Ridge. Yeah.
And they called me in the middle of the night and said, "Where's the town? We want to meet with you." So I didn't know what they were going to meet about, you know. And so I said, "Okay, let's meet in the morning." So we had a shade over here. So we had them together, and they came and they were told me to get Richard Brokenose. So I went out and got him. And here he was part of the delegation that went to Hussein years ago. And they wanted to know, Parliament wanted to know where we came from as Lakota people. Mm. And I said, how do you arrive at that? He said, well, 100 years ago there were 10 tribes, and they only found 7. And since then we found 2 in the last 100 years. But we never found the 10th one. And then we think it's a Lakota nation. So how do you arrive at that? And he said, well, God gave a gift to each of the 9 bands. And we're the 10th. We're the only tribe in the USA that got a gift from God. So that's what they concluded, the way they came from. And there's 11 Muslim nations that are looking at you. If you say yes, we are part of it, then it'll help you, 11 nations. And that's what it is.
And so the Muslim nations believe the Lakotas are one of their...
one of their bands.
Wow, that's pretty interesting.
He resided in the territory that we call today Palestine. Some may call it Israel, but I like to use the term Palestine. And he lived there for centuries. The Phoenicians brought many of these so-called red nations over to the territory that we call America. The Phoenicians brought them here on boats. Before they got here on boats, we know Phoenicians is Negroes. Before they got here on boats, they resided again in the territory that we call Palestine. So now let's fast forward today. This is why the Palestinians, I don't care, for the last 100 years, if not more, when it comes to this territory, again, that we call the United States, the first people that they want to see is their brothers and their sisters. And who are their brothers and sisters? They run to the Native Americans. That's their people, beloved. Uh-oh. You didn't know that, did you? I know, you so busy being African, you ain't paying attention to what's going on around you. I get it.
I've got a question. I want to sort this out. I want to get the update on something. I may have mentioned this before, but I want to dedicate this video directly to this question. Is it possible that the Native Americans were actually derived from a Jewish background, a Hebrew background, out of the 12 tribes? I've heard a theory before that the Native Americans actually were part of the lost tribe of Israel, as compared to simply being of Asian descent and crossing over through the Bering Strait and sailing down.
That's why they have the story in their traditions and moved on to the Southeast territory that we call the United States. They didn't come, they wasn't always here. They wasn't always here. They were brought here. They came out of the mountains. Maybe that's a different story for a different day, right? Today we're talking about the mound builders. We're just going to talk about the mound builders, and we're using a congressional record that when they was looking at the mounds in Ohio, they found the Negro skull there, not the Mongoloid. So let's go one step further. We're going to talk about another source, right? Because we're in the late 1800s. We're going to bring it all full circle shortly, right? There's another source we're going to use. It's called the Miscellaneous Notes and Queries, and this was produced in 1892, right? So we're in the late 1800s with it, right? And what I want to do is I want to show you the range of thought pattern from devils, right? Let's go right into the source. Let's go right in the source. We're going to go to page 147, where it says the Adamic race, right? The Adamic race. Reply to area, Doctors Young and Blackie on the Negro. Bullet point 1. The Negro does not belong to the Adamic species. Bullet point 2. He is not a descendant of Adam and Eve. Bullet point 3. He is not the offspring of Ham. Bullet point 4. He is not a beast. He is a human being. Right? No shit, Sherlock. Bullet point 5. He has an immortal soul, but not after the image of God. Bullet point 6. And every attempt to civilize him after our forms has resulted in a speedy and certain destruction, right? Which makes sense because the original man can't follow after the ways of the devil. It's just not going to work. By MS, the unity of the human race is unscriptural, contrary to the laws of science, and destructive to the welfare of every species of man. New York, 1868. Let's stop. Let's talk about this real quick. What's going on is this. There's an individual named Ariel. He's a devil. And they're going back and forth about the position of the Negro. They're trying to figure out whence did the Negro come? What is its beginning? Like, where did this guy come from? Now, the messenger teaches us that the Negro don't have a birth record, right? So that's very key, because that's what I always say to my Afrocentric brothers. Yo, we don't have a, you can't point to a time where there was no Negroes anywhere. Like, it's not going to happen, beloved. It's not possible. You can't, nobody can point to a continent and say, oh, this is when the first Negro got here, or this is when the first Negro got there, because the Negro don't have a birth record. We don't have a beginning. There never was a time on any land that you can't point to a Negro or when was the first Negro got there. That doesn't even make sense. Nobody has the power to tell you from another group where you were. Oh man, y'all wasn't over here. South America, there was no Negroes there to the slave trade. North America, there was no Negroes to the slave. How would they know? You think these folks know every square mile of planet Earth? They can tell you what people group is where? That doesn't even make sense, beloved. In any event, maybe that's a different story for a different day. They're going back and forth about the beginning of the Negro, right? Where did he come from and what happened and this and that? So we're going to go on to page 148. It says, this is illustrated with cuts of the Adamic race, the Mongolian, the Malay, the American Indian, the Esquimaux, the Ethiopian, and the Negro, right? We're going to go on to the next paragraph. That the Negro is not a beast but has a soul, not created after the image of God. That he was created interior to Adam, that means before Adam, together with all the inferior races, numerous in the valley of the Nile, who, check this out, were also the mound builders. But where were these Negroes going around the world? Where were they building the mounds at? The writer says throughout Asia and also in North and South America. And subsequently, Adam and Eve were created, and then creation was complete. Let's stop. Let's talk about that. In the late 1800s, I just want to show you guys range. They're talking about Negroes from the Congressional halls of politics in this country all the way up to just writers speaking their opinions about Negroes. Now, the late 1800s, where is the Negro position in the world? Think about it. Where's your position in the world? Right? 1860 to 1866, things are changing around in the territory that we call the United States. You got the Civil War, Emancipation Proclamation, you got the Confiscation Act. Negroes is now, quote unquote, free, right? You don't have no full rights. The devil got his foot on our neck. We leaving from one form of working, which is plantation, to sharecropping. And while we at the bottom of the rungs of society, right, there's a devil right in the book. And he's saying in the book that they can't figure out where this Negro come from. One thing they know for sure, no matter how, when they just think about it, this guy was always here. So much so, he couldn't have been here through Bible days. He was here before Adam. He was already here. Now, the messenger always taught us that. The messenger said Negroes ain't come from Adam. When Adam came, when all that story stuff came, we was already here. Maybe that's a different story for a different day. So here's the very, very key part I want you guys to focus on, right? We at the time in this territory that we call it United States was at the bottom. At the very bottom, I mean, the devil had his neck, his foot on our neck, I should say, right? And even then, they know enough about us to say, these Negroes build the mounds everywhere. From Kemet to Asia to North America and South America. They know more about our history than we know. Now, how did this guy get a hold on to this information? He wasn't born in it. This is why I'm pointing at the time period. Devils all the way from government, all the way to regular devils that's writing. We are in the fields working all day, every day, and we doing this and we doing that. And while we at our lowest point, they know behind the scenes, these Negroes made these mounds over here. They're going to shoot you at the African game when they get in front of you. Oh, brother, y'all from Africa. Yeah, we brought you all here in the bottom of the ship. And then when they get behind closed doors, they write these books because they're not writing these books for you. See, the thing about that, I always ask my people, they'll say, yo, when the Negro was allowed to read? Because there was a time in this country Negroes couldn't read now. Like, when? Give me some dates. Give me some times on that. See, I do that to avoid two things. Some of our people say, man, they just writing this stuff to trip you up. That stuff didn't really happen? Okay, if they're writing all this stuff to trip you up, okay. But you couldn't even read at the time. If you could, tell me when you was able to read. And then when you show me that you could read, show me and tell me what you were reading outside of that Bible. Now, I always say this as well. I can use that example today. Like, what the hell do you read today? The Source magazine don't count. Double XL don't count. The Feds magazine that you keep sending to your people that's behind the wall, that don't count. What do you read on your leisure time? Like, what do you read? Outside of the good book, outside of the Quran. Because, you know, we bump on our head 5 times a day now. So, like, outside of those books, what do you read? While we was at our lowest state, beloved, the lowest state, behind the scenes, they're writing and they're talking about us saying those Negroes build the mounds all over the earth. That's what this dude just pretty much said. The Negroes did it. Now, you go through some of their older, earlier writings, you can see, even in this document that I'm reading right now, man, these folks are so racist about our people. But it's not shocking. It's just the devil. That's just how that works. But they wasn't trying to be politically correct. They gonna say what's on their mind. They write it. You ain't reading this. You reading something else. Even that though, they can tell our people who they are. They know who we are. Now, the thing about me is, it's hard to convince Negroes who they are. Because these Negroes, see, they got this in their soul that they came from that ship, man. So when you show them mounds that was built in this land, the devil know you did it. He know the red man ain't do it. He know you did it. It's hard for our people to accept we did it. Yeah, we're going to have another conversation because I'm going to show and prove. We're going to start talking about great black men in the Americas, right? When I start talking about Montezuma, it's going to be what it is. When I start talking about Vicente Guerrero, that's just what it is. That's what it is. We're going to have these conversations about great kings and rulers in the Americas that was Negroes. And then I'm going to have to show you the date when they was running. And that's going to change the game on a lot of stuff. See, all I got to do is plant the seed. I ain't got to do a whole lot. We have these conversations like, man, I ain't got to do nothing but plant the seed. Because eventually, this stuff is not going to make sense anymore. When we start talking about Montezuma, and, you know, we have brothers and sisters, right, that's in the United States military, and that's how they're familiar with him, you know, because that's the Marine song. You know, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. And they never hit their mind, who was Montezuma? And then when we show you that Montezuma was a Negro, and then you start to look and say, well, damn, I didn't know he was, but he took his reign in the 1500s. But wait a minute, how did he, all that runaway slave ship bullshit is not gonna add up no more now. When I start showing you Vincent Guerrero about how he was running the show, and you're gonna, cause I'm gonna make that gap on purpose. I'm going to show you Montezuma in 1500s, and I'm going to show you Vincent Guerrero in the 1800s, and I'm going to say, well, okay, if these men are kings and presidents and they're Negroes, what law did he uphold? What customs did he uphold? And why are they written out of history as being a Negro? That's going to open up a different conversation. Because up until then, we started talking about great black kings. We talking, man, Shaka Zulu, this, and we love Shaka. Shaka's our brother. You know, we love Mansa Musa. That's our brother. We love him. But we're going to start talking about some black kings that was on this side of the Atlantic. We are, all our life, we talked about them on the other side. We're going to talk about them on this side. Deal? Peace and black power to your family. Thank you guys for hanging out. Thank you guys for listening. Hey, man, these red Indian guys talking about we trying to steal their culture, but love it. Man, if you Johnny come latelys don't sit down some goddamn where. Until next time, family, peace, man. I get it with you guys. Peace.
All right, everybody, we back. I hope y'all got something out of that bit there. I want to go on and talk about these contracts, because one of the worst things that could ever happen to an individual is for them to have no knowledge of self. They don't know who they are. They don't know where they come from. They don't know anything about their identity. And they're trying to make it in this society and in this world and stuff, but with no knowledge of self. No, in other words, no foundation, because you can plant a tree and that tree can grow up and can be beautiful and all of that stuff. And then you could take and dig that tree up by the root and cut the roots off and then replant the tree. Well, it's going to die. So you cut off his knowledge of self. You cut off his roots. You cut off his ancient story. And that's the same thing that a lot of people inside this country that are going through. Now, I have some more questions I think we need to consider. And one of the questions is, where does the word history come from? Where did that come from? Who are the first people on the planet? Where did they originate from? Where are the Negroes in Africa, or the place that you call Egypt? Where are who created the word Egypt or Egyptian? Who came out of that? What did the people in Egypt that you call Turtle Island, who are these people? The original people now are the descendants of the ancient Egyptians in America. These are just, who were the mound builders? And my final question is, what is crime? What is that? These are just points that I want you all to consider. And I'm going to take a commercial break. We're going to take a little break. And when we come back, we'll pick up where we left off at. So y'all hold on a minute. We'll be right back. Okay? As a secured party and creditor, can you buy a home, a car, and other items you need and want? The answer is yes. And there are documents you use to do just that. Catch my radio podcast at Blog Talk Radio. Go to TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Fill out the box with your email address that say join our mailing list, and I will send you my free report. You got credit problems? Contact me at tarhakadebtelimination.org. Let's stay in honor and get into the private. All right, everybody, we're back. We just took a little quick break there. Now, let's talk about these contracts again and how important it is for you to form your own contract. Would be maybe a good idea if you create your own outline. You got heading at the top. You got everything that you're gonna say in the contract, and if it's an affidavit and you're trying to make a point with somebody or whatever, what have you, you put your bullet points in, you put your fee schedule in, and date and signature, and then you can go ahead and get it notarized and what have you. But when you are going to send this to someone, it's always a good idea to send that certified mail with return receipt. That's sending it to, they'll, because you send it certified mail, and then they'll have to sign for it in order for them to have it. Okay, that's one point I want to make. And the next point I want to make is I want to stress one more time how important it is for you to read the fine print on any contract that's pushed in front of you. If you are going to get an automobile and you're going to fill out the application and stuff, but why don't down at the bottom and read the fine print and see what it says. And you might want to do a little investigation on it down there. You know what I'm saying? Okay? All right. We're finna go into another segment, and y'all hold on. I hope you got paper and pencil for this stuff.
Since the late 1630s, the people of color in America have been struggling with the actual account of their true identities. After being labeled a race of people under certain classifications based upon skin hue, the complexity of learning their background, heritage, and culture was relied upon the Western European settlers that won the hundreds of war invasions that took place immediately in the year of 1492 and beyond. The inability of governments of America and Europe to come to grips with their dark past and allow the Aborigines, who are natives to the land of America, as well as the descendants of everyone else involved, the healing required to move forward is not only a denial of basic human rights, but a telltale sign of the type of current racism, economic neglect, and mistreatment that will surely come to light during this generation of life. The threads of these ancient cultures of the Aborigine people, having existed here for tens of thousands of years prior to the arrival of the Europeans, must be preserved, strengthened, and woven back into a quilt that tells the unique story of not only their past, but of their bright future as well. The reasons for this runs much deeper than one may assume. One reason being, we have thousands of ancient history records, artifacts, tombstones, and hieroglyphics, etc., all in Africa. But to really put the full puzzle together, one must learn the facts of the actual accounts of the Aborigines of America, because they are the direct ancestors of the now called African Americans. In today's America, we are witnessing the now called Native Americans battle against the federal government over the Dakota pipeline. They are protesting because of the government's approval of this pipeline forces the removal of hundreds of their ancestors' respectful and sacred cemeteries from the land. But actions like this are not uncommon by the federal government. In fact, the immigration of native Indians of this land started in 1492, and one untold example of that took place in the year of 1838. At that time, the federal government began forced removal of any Cherokee Indian and or Creek Indian families who had neither applied for state citizenship nor moved to their newly established Indian territory in the state of Oklahoma on their own. Crude stockades were constructed to temporarily contain captured Creek and Cherokee families until they could be quickly relocated outside of the state of Georgia. One of those stockades was on the Etowah River near Canton in Cherokee County, Georgia. Nearly all Cherokee family cemeteries have been removed by late 1839 except for a couple, due to the fact that there were very few Cherokees in Cobb County, Georgia that actually went on the Trail of Tears. A large cemetery of Indian slaves, or rather Aborigine people of America, located in Marietta, Georgia, that dates from approximately 1812 to the 1880s, has not been removed, and it's very essential to the history of the Aborigines. I personally asked a few of my good military friends to ask any ranking soldier, preferably someone of Aborigine descent, to go to this location for me and record what it actually looks like, due to the fact that it's gated up and it's off limits to the public for obvious reasons.
So some of the people that's been working here for a while, they informed me, like, this morning, that there was an actual cemetery on base where slaves were buried. And I'm like, what? Like, seriously, if there's a cemetery where slaves were buried that we could go and visit? So I was like, you gotta take me. You have to take me. So I'm out here right now, y'all, and I kind of want you guys to go, like, on a journey with me. I'm going into the actual gate right now. Let me see if I can turn this around. So I'm going into the actual gate. They have it gated off right now. From what I heard, they've been trying to clear it and find more grave sites, but they need help in clearing it. You see, it's all, like, covered in debris and just not manicured or anything like that right now, but They said where the red flags are, if you guys can see the red flags, that's where the actual people are buried that don't have tombstones. But some of these, y'all, look at this. This is crazy, y'all. Some of these really have tombstones. I'm going to show you guys right now. This is crazy. So this is the first one, guys. I think the name is Annie Robinson, and she was born in 1823, died December 17, 1892. This is like such an amazing, you know, anybody that knows me knows I'm like extremely happy right now because this is you know, this is rare. Like, this is a part of our history, our culture, and you know, we have to learn about this stuff. We have to know about this stuff. We have to know where we came from. This one right here, this person was born April 20th, 1891. I can't make out the name. Last name is definitely Moore, though. I can make that out. It looks as if it's two people, somebody and Rosa Moore. So I'm not sure if I can go a little further back for you guys. Like, I'm actually standing on the ground in the cemetery, walking around. Look at this one back here. He's making his own video. This is like absolutely amazing. Did you find anything else? Is it? I'm on my way. Oh gosh. Y'all should see what I'm walking through right now. Like, this is crazy. Oh gosh. Oh. Y'all, if I fall, oh shoot. Please don't laugh at me if I fall, y'all. But you alright? What'd you find? Uh-huh. Oh, great. So look, all these red flags, y'all, are where people were actually, where our ancestors are actually buried. So this tombstone right here is kind of leaning a little bit. Let me see if I can push it. Oh, Lord. Push it up so you guys can. Rebecca Bedford. And she was born May 11, 1868 and died December 20th, 1908. And it just has our mother on that one. And it's a few more, you know, back here. But this whole area, if you guys, I don't know if you can see, like, one of my co-workers back there, he said the graves go as far as back as he is right now. And oh my God, I'm just overly excited right now. I really need to calm this thing down. And we really need to get this cleaned up. I mean, I don't know who owns our installation. That's probably something I need to find out. Or I heard that there was a team that come out here and they're trying to put a team together to come help take care of this, because this is something that should be cherished and cleaned up. And oh my God. So this lady, Miss Jackson, was born April 17, 1930. Let me just put that out there. That's one day before my birthday. Let me see what hers says. Faithful until death.
This is no longer a secret. These are our ancestors. I'm just here to make you think.
All right, we're back, ladies and gentlemen. We're gonna move forward here. I'll be talking about a little bit more about contracts in a minute, but I'm gonna get down here and get some more of this stuff out here. I got folks coming over here, and I gotta make sure that I get them situated. So y'all hold your hat, and we'll be right back. Okay? Just hold on a minute. When you know what the Internal Revenue Service is and what their job and duties are, you can use the correct way to deal with them. There's a remedy for you to use. When it comes to the IRS, go to tarhakadebtelimination.org. Fill out the box with your email address that says join our mailing list. The Internal Revenue Service is a private-for-profit corporation, but there are rules and regulations. Get my free report. Learn about what's going on in America today. That's TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Lose your fear for the Internal Revenue Service by knowing exactly what to do based on what you know about them and what remedies are available to you to use. TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Peace.
Log on to patreon.com/Dane Calloway or paypal.me/Dane Calloway to support me, my channel, and my content. Merchandise is now available at I'mJustHereToMakeYouThink.com.
Black America is potentially the most dangerous group of humans alive today. Dangerous to who? Dangerous to the corporate empire, Illuminati, imperial scum, whatever you want to call them, white supremacists.
White supremacy is the problem. Jews just happen to be white.
How much of the problem in the black community are the blacks' own fault?
Well, white supremacy is the main problem in our community. If we
How much of the problems are your own fault?
If we resolve white supremacy, we will resolve the problems of unemployment. We will resolve the problems of bad housing. The Reagan administration probably represented the epitome of white supremacy by cutting into every domestic livable program that whites and blacks had, especially poor people, and they showed their relationship with these people by proving their insensitivity. Now, Mr. Cook,
and the reason they're dangerous is because they're quite easily united. It might seem not true because there's so much division within black people in America, but the only reason they're divided is because the corporate empire spends billions of dollars keeping them divided because they are potentially dangerous.
Mr. Coakley, you've attacked Jesse Jackson, you attacked the late Mayor Harold Washington, you called them colorless. What black leaders, political leaders in this country do you respect?
Well, I think politics has a way of accommodation. I don't think we have true political leaders in the sense of that you're going to find purity in politics. Politics is about accommodation and compromise. When our black leaders go into politics, as was discussed recently in Harper's Magazine, blacks have to prove to whites that they will protect their interests first. That's why politics is not the type of game that we're going to continue to invest all our time in, because it's proven that it doesn't work. Politics will not whip white supremacy, but clear, accurate, documented challenges to white supremacy, as well as action, grassroots action, taking against the forces of white supremacy.
What makes them dangerous? Well, 45 million people united in the US would be very dangerous. What kind of things is dangerous? Well, you might think I'm talking about protesting or getting together and rallying and that kind of stuff. Well, no, that's not the kind of danger I'm talking about. 45 million people united could do some serious damage to the financial market. 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 Serious damage to the financial market.
So I'm dark-skinned with an accent, and when you had an accent back then, Africans, well, it wasn't that many Africans in America then. It was mostly Jamaicans. So you had an accent, you automatically Jamaican.
Right.
Africans, well, it wasn't that many Africans in America at that time. It was mostly Jamaicans.
You have to be logical. If I know that in this hotel room they have food every day, and I'm knocking on the door every day to eat, and they open the door, let me see the flowing food around, but they're telling me there's no food in there. Every day, I'm standing outside trying to sing my way in. We are hungry, please let us in. We are hungry, please let us in. After about a week, that song is going to change to, we hungry, we need some food. After 2-3 weeks, it's like, give me all the food, racking out the door. After a year, then you just like, I'm picking the lock, coming through the door, blasting. We asked 10 years ago, we was asking with the Panthers,
We was asking was that, you know, the civil rights movement. We was asking, you know. Now those people that were asking, they're all dead and in jail. So now what do you think we're going to do?
What that was all about, the revolution will not be televised. That was about the fact that the first change that takes place is in your mind. You have to change your mind before you change the way you live and the way you move. So when we said that the revolution will not be televised, we were saying that, like, the thing that's going to change people is something that no one will ever be able to capture on film. It'll just be something that you see, and all of a sudden you realize, I'm on the wrong page, or I'm on the right page, but I'm on the wrong note. And I've got to get in sync with everyone else to understand what's happening in this country.
In today's society of America, millions of people of all complexions are still undergoing the effects of a variety of dominant social engineering experiments, which just so happens to play a prominent role among their everyday lives unknowingly. Not only that, there are in fact particular prominent groups of people that have set the mandatory rules and regulations that all American citizens must abide by, still to this very day. And when it specifically comes to the so-called African Americans, or rather the descendants of the copper-colored indigenous people who occupied all of the now American lands pre-colonial times, the experimental methodologies are deeply rooted, especially physically and mentally, by way of things such as industrialism, environmental racism, compulsory education, manipulative indoctrination, paper genocide, and eugenics. However, I would like for you to note that the freedom of having life is like a seed. It cannot grow on its own and become a plant unless the climate changes environmentally. Now, many of you can recall hearing the phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I agree with it to a certain extent, because even though you may be doing great right now, you should always make room for improvements, or rather changes, because it's better to be prepared than repaired after the damage is already done. Which brings me to my very first point of this segment, and that is, why are people of color in America considered to be the biggest threat throughout American society? Now, this question alone would be continuously answered throughout this video and my other correlating documentaries, because of how much detailed information is critically important to note when answering this question. This threat can be traced all the way back to the late 1700s and very early 1800s, at a time when white African and European colonizationalists, or rather kidnappers, were afraid of the threat of being murdered by the so-called coloreds, or rather the indigenous people of North America, due to the multiple Indian raids, rebellions, documented and undocumented wars rapidly occurring during this time period. This is also the very same time period where these kidnappers demanded that the Negroes be removed from the lands of America and shipped away to newly established American colonized lands in Africa along the coast. Multiple religious societies campaigned for this idea to become a reality, especially the Catholics and the Quakers, just to name a few. But the ball began to roll once John Lynch wrote a letter to the president. According to records held by the National Archives, in a letter to then former President Thomas Jefferson, dated December 25, 1810, John Lynch, who colonized lands he named after himself called Lynchburg, Virginia, made a descriptive proposition to Thomas Jefferson that called for the, quote, colonization of the nigger people on the coast of Africa, so that a settlement can be established for immigrating the freed people of color out of North America and into Africa somewhere along the coast. In my documentary called African American Slaves in West Africa, History Books Are Lying, Part 2, I shared much detailed informative information in relation to what really happened in American history. I exposed that we were all led to believe that our ancestors were stolen from parts of West Africa and then shipped to the Americas, when in reality, that information was told to us all in reverse. Some of our ancestors were forcefully relocated from southern eastlands of North America to lands west of the Mississippi River, and also along the coast of Africa, and especially South and West Africa. I highly recommend that you watch that video, for it is critically important for the sake of our real documented history. Now, another side of this threat would be allowing the people of color to think freely. Being as though English was not our ancestors' original language to begin with, the early European and African colonizationalists implemented manipulative methods to force their own traditions, language, and cultures, just to name a few, upon our ancestors mentally, which in turn rapidly obstructed our ancestors' well-being physically, systematically. This method was also purposely designed to decimate their literacy and critical thinking capabilities, along with quelling the thoughts of retaliation by fear-mongering, allowing for this social engineering format of eugenics to prevail from generation to generation, affecting only those who are forcefully under the spell of its digested forms of slavery, or rather oppression, under the mysterious provisions and racist ideologies of white supremacy.
First day. So I asked my students, okay, what happened during Reconstruction right after the Civil War? What went on there? And what happened to me was an aha reaction, or I might better call it a no reaction, because 16 out of my 17 students said to me, that's the time when, right after the Civil War, Reconstruction, blacks took over the government of the southern states. But they were too soon out of slavery, and so they screwed up, and white folks had to take control again.
Birth of a Nation, the 1903 movie?
Yeah, Birth of a Nation, Gone with the Wind, all rolled into one. Birth of a Nation, Gone with the Wind, all rolled into one. And of course, these are all African-American students. I thought, my gosh, what must it do to you to believe that the one time your group was center stage in American history, they screwed up? Now, it'd be a different matter if this happened, but it didn't happen. This is, in fact, what we in sociology call BS history, that is bad sociology. BS history, that is bad sociology. They started the public school systems for both races. There were scattered schools for white folks, but no system that included the whole state. And of course, there were no schools at all for black folks. It was illegal, a felony, to teach even free blacks to read and write. So they didn't screw up. So anyway, I went to nearby schools. I watched, this was just before massive school desegregation, so I watched black teachers teaching all black classes this white supremacist history that was complete BS because they were just teaching what was in the book.
In my documentary called The Duplicity of the Public School System, I shared much detailed informative information about the pseudoscientific methods utilized by way of college professors, anthropologists, sociologists, and many other correlating co-conspirators in order to teach all people of color, along with non-elite white people, about white supremacy-filled U.S. history, world history, and so-called African American studies and history, even though there were in fact very few of these scholars that were adamantly opposed to such teachings.
And what, may I ask, is an Aryan? I don't know myself. But let us see what our present so-called authorities have to say about it. They say he is tall, slender, blue-eyed, and blonde. There is no Aryan race. And more important, there is no master race. There are people who may find these ideas convenient, but science cannot support them. There is no scientific proof that there's any correlation between a man's racial characteristics and his native ability or character. In all racial groups, we find the same range of potentialities. We find idiots and geniuses. We find criminals and philanthropists. We must judge each man as an individual and not by the color of his skin or his eyes or by the length of his nose. Come in, gentlemen. It's comfortable. And remember that there is no master race. That is a scientific truth. Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying.
Even during the times when the existence of federal laws prevented people of color to learn anything dealing with these foreigners' ambitions, agendas, and even their own propaganda. One must not forget about the year of 1776, when a new sheriff pinned his shiny badge to his chest, and a code of conduct was created and implemented into the so-called laws of the lands. I'll be sharing more details about that in a later planned documentary. Now, the next part of this threat is also very noteworthy and critically important to the descendants of the indigenous Aboriginal Niji of this land, Turtle Island, now known as the Americas. Many of you can recall the American Holocaust of 1921, when the U.S. and federal government ordered the bombing of so-called Negro residents and businesses in the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma, murdering thousands of people of color and destroying hundreds of their own very prosperous businesses by way of U.S. Army planes, literally dropping bomb after bomb throughout the Greenwood district by way of an executive order called martial law, in which this specific order was created by Congress and President Woodrow Wilson of the Democratic Party before leaving office in March of 1921, and then immediately approved and implemented into law by then President Warren Harding of the Republican Party in May of 1921, just a few days prior to inflicting a deadly Holocaust upon its own American citizens. Now, I originally named my documentary about this The American Holocaust of 1921, and after the documentary accumulated 60,000 views in 4 hours, YouTube removed the video. However, after nearly a month of back and forth, it was placed back on my channel, and it is now called The History of the Negro Wall Street, the Unforgettable Horrific Event of 1921. That is a documentary that I highly recommend for all people to watch. Now, I said all of that to say this. There is a reason why the famous influential activist named Frederick Douglass was able to contribute, quote, tens of thousands of dollars of his own money in order to save the abolishment of all 37 branches of the Freedmen's Savings and Trust Banks that were created by law through then President Abraham Lincoln on March 3, 1865. And before I state that reason, I want you to note the timeline here. The Civil War began on April 12, 1861, in which history states that the war occurred allegedly due to disagreements between politicians of the North, or rather the Union, and the politicians of the South, or rather the Confederate States, over the abolishment of slavery. However, the truth is that the Civil War was actually about integrating the free enterprise system with more of the indigenous aboriginals of the American lands, being as though many of our ancestors during this time period were not slaves, but rather indentured servants, who were literally sharecroppers that owned farms, banks, and other institutions of business, which in turn allowed both heads of the same snake to acknowledge the fact that our ancestors were rising up as capitalists within this industrialized society. In other words, The Union recognized that the so-called Negroes in the North and the South were rapidly prospering tremendously economically, and they wanted to go into business with them to further their expertise in the free enterprise system. But most politicians of the South disagreed with this notion, being as though it single-handedly threatened the longevity of their not-so-prosperous small to medium-sized businesses. So the Civil War began in April 1861 and completed in May of 1865. Before the Civil War ended, some very important key factors occurred within this timeline. For example, see, that manipulative lie was told to you as a fear-mongering tactic in order to depict that one race of people are somehow superior to others. When King stated that through an act of Congress, the government was giving away millions of acres of land, he was referring to the Homestead Act of 1862, in which just a little over 30 years prior to this law, our ancestors' cultures, heritage, history, identities, resources, and lands were stripped away and became possessions of the federal government in order to be distributed to the, quote, free whites that immigrated to America from Africa and Europe during the early 1800s.
Which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. Which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor.
The Homestead Act of 1862 granted these white peasants, as King describes, our lands that were stripped from our indigenous ancestors and all of the specialized benefits the federal government promised our ancestors by peace treaties that they would receive for being 90% of the help they needed in order for the United States to win all 61 documented wars that occurred during the 1800s alone. Side note, the Emancipation Proclamation abolished all forms of slavery the very next year in 1863. The so-called free Negroes and the so-called freed Negroes, along with the so-called freedmen, were royally upset and disgusted with the federal government. So they continued the multiple rebellions until they saw a change. The Homestead Act of 1866 was established by the government that allowed the Negro 40 acres and a mule. But the catch was that the Negro had to buy the land, and the price of the lands were lowered just enough so that the Negro could not afford it still. This is what King meant by America refused to give the Negro any land. These Homestead Acts gave these foreigners government-funded assistance, where the government hired our ancestors to teach these foreigners how to farm.
Not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm, with government money to teach them how to farm.
Because keep in mind, a true foreigner or immigrant wouldn't know how to grow anything in a mass area of land that they are not accustomed with or never inhabited before in their life. This is why King stated our farms.
They provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms,
Okay, so now, this timeline that I'm referring to begins with the Civil War in April 1861. Then, the first official Homestead Act of 1862. Then, the very next year, the Emancipation Proclamation Bill was implemented into law in 1863, in which that bill alone had absolutely nothing to do with freeing slaves from chains and shackles, like how history so loves to claim. No. In fact, the word emancipate derives from the Latin word emancipatus, which is the process of being set free from legal, social, or political restrictions, which has nothing to do with enslavement. In fact, the Latin word for civil is civilis, which means to affect fellow citizens in a legal or political sense. In other words, the stories of slavery in the Americas did not happen the way we were originally taught by authors of American history and world history. Because once an individual literally researches their family's genealogical background by records, instead of taking the word from some self-proclaimed scholars within their own communities with absolutely no publicly verifiable evidence to manifest, they will be met with the truth that these so-called slaves in America were actually prisoners of war who were contracted as indigent servants by way of industrialism, which also means that your ancestors were sharecroppers, being as though they were the original landowners who were contracted by the tenants, or rather the white colonizationalists who immigrated to North America from Africa and Europe, in which these tenants were allowed to use the sharecroppers' land by contract or treaty in return for a share of the crops produced on the sharecroppers' very own land. But this deal went bad, obviously due to a particular group of people that had a totally different hidden agenda in mind. The next part of this timeline would be President Abraham Lincoln crafting the 40 acres and a mule Field Action 15 in Savannah, Georgia, for the so-called Negro sharecroppers during the months of January and February in the year of 1865, which should immediately indicate to you that the Lincoln administration was willing to work out multiple other economic deals with the complaining indigenous people of North America who were rebelling and raiding multiple territories at this time due to being betrayed and undervalued by both the local and federal governments. So the very next month, in March of 1865, Lincoln was sure to create federal banks for the so-called freedmen that fought on both sides of the American Civil War, along with their descendants. These banks are known as the Freedmen's Savings and Trust Banks, or the Freedmen's Banks for short, in which over 72,000 accounts were opened, which led these banks to raise a staggering $52 million at that time, which is equivalent to over $100 billion right now, making it the largest grossing bank in American history at that time. Then, the very next month came, and President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated on April 15, 1865, which forced Frederick Douglass to take over the Freedmen's Banks, using tens of thousands of his own sharecropping money, which was a lot of money at that time due to him being a businessman of color, just like millions of our ancestors were. Then, in the year of 1875, after much demand economically, along with well-respected hard work continued to manifest by way of the indigenous aboriginals of this land, Congress passed the first ever Civil Rights Bill in American history, allowing for the white immigrants to go into business with the indigenous businessmen and women of America. Our ancestors were prospering so well that a surge of newly established businesses and banks were rapidly changing the economy on a daily basis, and it also outnumbered the amount of banks owned and operated by whites. This time was uncommonly known as the beginning stages of the Civil Rights Movement, to a point where businesses owned by people of color went from about 3,000 to nearly 60,000 businesses. And the people of color that owned banks went from about 35 banks to nearly 150 banks nationwide, from the years of 1875 all the way until the year of 1934, according to the FDIC and the Federal Reserve. Now, so many important events occurred in the year of 1934 alone that I will have to save it for part 2 of this segment. However, I would like for you to know that people would love to claim that the place called Africa has the most resources ever in history. But if that is the actual truth, then why do you consistently see real Africans immigrating to North America to work at a job or to open up their own business and collect resources from here in America, then publicly inform their friends, colleagues, and co-workers that they are doing this all in order to send it all back to their families who are residing in Africa, literally? See, the answer to that question is very simple, because in today's society, the one set group of people who unknowingly accumulates all of the wealth upon this nation that keeps this country running in the first place, but would immediately spread its wealth to everyone under the sun other than themselves, which in turn attracts national and international businesses to their pockets alone, are in fact the so-called African Americans of this country today, which in turn leads you to now know the truth about why multiple economic records would state every single year that so-called African Americans would make up around 1% of America's wealth overall, purposely telling you the story in reverse in order to hide the truth, making that the real reason why African Americans, or rather the indigenous aboriginals of Turtle Island, are the biggest threat to America's society, but they just don't know it yet. I'm just here to make you think.
All right, everybody, we're back. The time's fleeting, and so before I go back into anything else, I'm going straight on down in here with the rest of this stuff to see if I can get all of it out. So y'all hold on a minute. Still rolling.
So this is a book called Select Letters of Christopher Columbus with other original documents relating to his 4 voyages to the New World. Translated and edited by R.H. Major, FSA, etc., Keeper of the Department of Maps and Charts in the British Museum, and Honorable Secretary of the Royal Geographical Society. And again, in the book, Select Letters of Christopher Columbus with other original documents. This is the collection of the Holyoke Society in Columbus' own words here in his 3rd voyage. He says, "The Holy Scriptures record that our Lord made the earthly paradise and planted in it the tree of life, and then springs of a fountain from which the 4 principal rivers in the world take their source, namely the Ganges in India, the Tigris and Euphrates in his blank there, which rivers divide a chain of mountains and form in Mesopotamia, flow thence into Persia, and the Nile, which rises in Ethiopia and falls into the Sea of Alexandria." Columbus continues, "I do not find, nor have ever found, any account by the Romans or Greeks which fixes in a positive manner the site of the terrestrial paradise. Neither have I seen it given in any map of Mundi, any mappa mundi, laid down from authentic sources." So Columbus is saying, hey, nobody has really definitely said, hey, here is the Garden of Eden. It's right here, like for sure. He's saying no Romans, no Greeks, and it's not on any mappa mundi map. People still don't know. All right. Some placed it in Ethiopia at the sources of the Nile. So which Ethiopia are we talking about? All right. Others traversing all these countries found neither the temperature nor the altitude of the sun correspond with their ideas respecting it, nor did it appear that the overwhelming waters of the deluge had been there. Alright, again, Columbus is telling you that when you go to all those places that you know, that they just mentioned is the Garden of Eden, right, like the Ganges, Mesopotamia, and the Nile and all that, if you go to the places where they say they are today, like Columbus is saying, you're not going to find it there. Alright, it says, while you traverse these countries, you found neither temperature nor the altitude of the sun to correspond with their ideas respecting it, or the Garden of Eden, right? Nor did it appear that the overwhelming waters of the deluge had been there. There's no signs of the flood on that side. We got much accounts of the flood over here in America. Some pagans pretended to adduce arguments to establish that it was in the Fortunate Islands, now called the Canaries. St. Isidore Bede Strabo and the master of scholastics history, with St. Ambrose and Scotus, and all the learned theologians agreed that the earthly paradise is in the east, etc. Now, you watch UB News YouTube channel. Much respect to the brother teaching us, giving us a clear perspective regarding the compass and how the East, didn't really mean East like how we think East means modern day, but we're talking about what it meant to the Hebrews was totally different, more like north or the past, right? And all this is just pointing to America. When you say the farthest east, if you keep going east, right, from Asia, where do you end up? The farthest east. That was always America, and that's the north, really. So Columbus is letting us know this, saying Isidori, Bede, Strabo, and the master of scholastic history, and with St. Ambrose and Scotus, all the learned theologians, right, agree that the earthly paradise is in the east, and that's America. I have already described my ideas concerning this hemisphere and its form. I have no doubt that it could pass below the equinoctial line after reaching the highest point of which I have spoken. I should find a much milder temperature and a variation in the stars and in the water. Not that I suppose that elevated point to be navigable, nor even that there is water there. Indeed, I believe it is impossible to ascend thither, because I am convinced that it is the spot of the earthly paradise. Again, just for your reference, this is Columbus' third voyage. He's in South America, terra firme. He had just passed Trinidad, the island of Trinidad, and he's in Orinoco. He's talking about the fresh water that comes out of the Orinoco, right? And this is where he's at, and he's letting us know that I believe it is impossible to ascend thither, because I am convinced that it is the spot of the earthly paradise, whither no one can go but by God's permission. But this land which your highness have now sent me to explore is very extensive, and I think there are many other countries in the south of which the world has never had any knowledge. I do not suppose that the earthly paradise is in the form of a rugged mountain, as the descriptions of it have made it appear, but that it is on the summit of the spot, which I have described as being in the form of the stalk of a pear. The approach to it from a distance must be by a constant and gradual ascent. But I believe that, as I have already said, no one could ever reach the top. I think also that the water I have described may proceed from it, though it be far off, and that stopping at the place which I have just left, it forms this lake. So he's saying the water he's describing was the Orinoco River, and he's saying that the Orinoco River is coming from the earthly paradise, whatever that mountain or high place he's saying. And we know it's coming from Mount Roraima, an ancient tree stump. So in regards to the earthly paradise, or the Garden of Eden, it says here in a book, Narrative and Critical History of America, edited by Justin Windsor from the Harvard University, Volume 2. It says, as he approached the coast, Columbus wrote, he heard in the dead of the night an awful roaring. So this is when he took his voyage over to the Tierra Firme, which they called South America, and when he reached the Orinoco River down in South America. And this is his description of what happened when he did. It says, he saw the sea rolling from west to east like a mountain as high as the ship, and approaching little by little. On the top of this rolling sea came a mighty wave of roaring with a frightful noise. When he entered the gulf and he saw how it was filled by the flow of the great river, he believed that he had witnessed far out at the sea the mighty struggle at the meeting of fresh with salt water. The river, he was persuaded, must be rushing down from the summit of the earth, where the Lord had planted the earthly paradise. In this midst whereof was a fountain, whence flowed the four great rivers of the world, the Ganges, the Tigris, the Euphrates, and the Nile. He did not quite agree with those earlier philosophers who believed that the earth was a perfect sphere, but rather that it was like the form of a pear, which is very round except where the stalk grows, at which part it is most prominent. There are great indications of this being the terrestrial paradise, continues Columbus, for its site coincides with the opinion of the holy and wise theologians whom I have mentioned again. So not only did he find some kind of evidence to make him link the earthly paradise there, but he's also saying that it coincides with the opinion of the holy and wise theologians. Alright? So they've always known it's not there. Right? The mythical Hesperides, the Garden of Eden, the terrestrial paradise. We've always been talking about this side of the world over here. We're talking about American, right? And moreover, the other evidences agree with the supposition, for I have never either read or heard of fresh water coming in so large a quantity in close conjunction with the water of the sea. The idea is also corroborated by the blankness of the temperature. And if the water of which I speak does not proceed from the earthly paradise, it seems to be still greater wonder, for I do not believe that there is any river in the world so large or so deep. Again, in the book Select Letters of Christopher Columbus, with the original documents saved by the Halliox Society, Columbus continues when he's in the third voyage, and basically in the dragon's mouth is called a bay, in the Orinoco River, and how so much fresh water is coming out of it that it has to be coming from the terrestrial paradise, he says. And I think that if the river mentioned does not proceed from the terrestrial paradise, it comes from an immense tract of land situated in the south, of which no knowledge has been hitherto obtained. But the more I reason on the subject, the more satisfied I become that the terrestrial paradise is situated in the spot I have described, and I ground my opinion upon the arguments and authorities already quoted. May it please the Lord to grant your highness a long life and health and peace to follow out so noble an investigation. Alright, so Columbus is basically letting you know this has to be, the more he thinks about it, this has to be the terrestrial paradise. I mean, remember, this is his third voyage. You've seen all the times he came and what he was seeing in all these islands in the Caribbean and everything. The amount of food and the fruits and everything, how fertile it is, and now he gets here and it's just even more. And the climate is so pleasant and so much fresh water coming out of this river that it goes into the ocean, and there's fresh water in the ocean. That's how powerful the Orinoco is. It's coming from Mount Roraima. So called The Antediluvian World, Atlantis, The Antediluvian World by Ignatius Donnelly. He points out certain things that he wants to address or talk about. Point number 5, that it was the true antediluvian world. Alright, so America / Atlantis, right, was the true antediluvian world. The Garden of Eden, there we go again, the Garden of Eden was in America. The Garden of the Hesperides, there you go, Hesperides.
right, everybody, we're back. I think you should have enough background on this contract situation. Treaties and contracts are all pretty much the same thing. It's an agreement. But the main point that I wanted to do this broadcast this way is to show you the magnitude and extent of contracts and how they have happened in the past and how they are still occurring today, and to have you consider how important it is for you to formulate your own contracts and send your contracts out instead of just a victim of somebody else's contract all the time. The clock is running down, and I still got some more to go, so you hold your hat.
Log on to patreon.com/Dane Calloway or paypal.me/Dane Calloway to support me, my channel, and my content. By demand, merchandise is now available at I'mJustHereToMakeYouThink.com.
My word to all black Americans, one thing I would like to say, let's not be deceived. Look at the record. Look at the promises that have been made over the past from the Democratic Party.
On this day, it is also the bicentennial of Charles Darwin's birth. It's worth a moment to pause and renew that commitment to science and innovation. Discovery that Lincoln understood so well.
So let's jump right into the next question. And it's so if we shouldn't call ourselves African Americans or black, then what should we call ourselves? And that is a very good question. All right, now if you take a look at my previous documentaries, I explained or shared rather detailed information as to the reason why you should not call yourself nor associate yourself with those dangerous terms. You are indigenous. You are indigenous to this land, not anywhere else. This land, Turtle Island, now known as North America.
Let's keep switching the identity to hide the people. Why don't we just keep renaming you? Are you Negro? Oh, no, you're not Negro. No, you're colored. No, you're not colored. You're African American. And this is what they name you. The slavers name you this. Because I know a white guy who grew up in South Africa. And he now lives in America. He is an African American, and more African American than most. Do you see how African American is a misnomer? It's a misnomer. Don't check that box. It's a title given to blacks by democratic slaves.
Now, in today's society of America, millions of so-called African Americans are struggling to come to grips with their true identity, culture, heritage, and history, mainly due to the numerous manipulative tactics utilized to govern their critical thinking mechanisms and to also decimate their literacy capabilities. Each one of these manipulative social engineering experiments can only be detected and detached from one's subconscious when standing outside of the box. I'll let you ponder on what's happening to those that are still inside of it. Meanwhile, you have not and will not ever hear me promote any form of religion throughout any of my content that I present to the public. Reason being is due to religion, faith, and beliefs are based on one's personal relationships. And I am not here to debate nor argue about who you should or should not love. That's simply none of my business. So let's also be sure not to confuse the truth that I present throughout my content with any personal beliefs that you may have. Now in this segment, you will learn about who you truly are and where you really came from based on truthful information. Because mind you, there is a big difference between truth and facts. Facts is merely controversial information, whereas a person bears the opinion to debate its credibility or not. That's yet another form of belief, whereas truth is non-debatable due to its credibility of always making logical sense. This is why in today's society, most people don't even care about the truth. Why? Because to them, unfortunately, a lie is more entertaining. Now, on March 1st, 1790, then President George Washington and Vice President John Adams, along with then Speaker of the House Frederick Muhlenberg, signed the 1790 Census Act. According to the census itself, it states that the 1790 Census Act is a law that, quote, required that every household be visited, that completed census schedules be posted in 2 of the most public places within each jurisdiction, there to remain for the inspection of all concerned, and that the aggregated amount of each description of persons for every district be transmitted to the President. So let me point out that some households, not all, were visited by these individuals entitled as census enumerators, also known as census takers, who are technically federally government unsupervised employees who allegedly went from town to town, city to city, and door to door, deciding who was of what race, and then documented the families they meet as such. So you mean to tell me that these census takers were provided instructions by way of the government to document and record the ethnic category of various family members based on their perception of the family when they visited, and their opinions were considered to be official historical records of information? Even though they did not count every individual living within the United States due to the multiple indigenous Niji raids and rebellions occurring during this time period, the alleged first official census of the entire United States was implemented on a day dubbed as Census Day on August 2nd, 1790. See, now what's very important to note here is that the, quote, free people of color were recorded all in one group, and also note that it states free and not freed, as if they were freed people from some form of enslavement. I go into full details regarding this topic at hand in my documentary called The Untold Truth About the Classifications of Race for African Americans. But of course I mentioned all of this for a particular reason, and that is the official 1790 U.S. Census population count was a total of 3,929,214 people. But keep in mind that this total amount did not reflect millions of people who were indigenous to North America, meaning they did not come from another continent, nor did it reflect the accurate total amount of so-called slaves in North America. Why? Well, the U.S. Census Agency themselves admitted to not possessing the majority of their official historical records of information that was allegedly documented between the 1790 U.S. Census and up to the 1830 U.S. Census. Their excuse was to claim that these records were lost or destroyed somehow. See, this was purposely done for 2 reasons. A, to hide the truth about the real history surrounding the U.S. in slavery. I mean, generally speaking, you can literally prove to yourself that your ancestors were slaves or not by documentation. You can check and see if your ancestors came off a boat. I have been sharing this information publicly for a few years now, along with my sources, and I still have not heard from anyone that used my directions to trace their family that I have listed in the description of this video, that one of their ancestors were documented as being a former slave. The people that reached out to me that has or is currently undergoing research on their family's genealogical background have not failed with discovering that their family members were either never enslaved and has always been free, or worked as an indigent servant for money, land ownership, business ownership, etc., and considered to be freedmen once their obligations of servitude expired. Make no mistake, when you hear the word freedman from now on, freedman does not necessarily mean that he or she was freed from enslavement, because it can also mean relieved from their duties in most commonly known cases. So, this first reason to allegedly lose or destroy these records were to hide the truth that it was a very small amount of copper-colored slaves and a greater amount of prisoners of war in North America. And the second reason is, B, to hide the truth about who are the real minority and majority in terms of the population count here in the United States of America. Which brings me to my very next point. If you are still watching, congratulations. You are now about to be made cognizant of one of the biggest reasons why I'm just here to make you think. Listen closely. The biggest portion of their hidden agenda was the abominable sabotaging of indigenous people's history, legacy, languages, culture, heritage, systematically. Of course they couldn't pull this task off on their own, so they implemented a methodology format based solely on the scientific concepts of eugenics. According to the National Archives, the term eugenics was coined by a British natural scientist and explorer named Francis Galton in the year of 1883. Now, there are two sides to every coin, so I'll flip each side over to uncover its hidden agendas. And by the way, I'm not theoretically speaking. Eugenics was implemented to help improve one selected group of people and their future generations to come, to overtake and oversee yet another set group of people and their future generations by way of extermination of their mindsets only. This rabbit hole goes much deeper than one may assume. Allow me to simplify the explanation of this paramount method utilized by the likes of our governmental industrialized institutions throughout America still to this very day. Eugenics literally changes everything that any person was ever taught of or even thought of previously before this selection was carried out upon him or her. Now, according to Francis Galton, this system would allow, quote, more suitable races or strains of blood a better chance of prevailing speedily over the less suitable, end quote. Galton was heavily influenced by the likes of an English naturalist, biologist, and the first ever self-proclaimed documented bigoted genealogist, famously known by the name of Charles Darwin. Darwin single-handedly developed the controversial theory surrounding human specimen and the system of natural selection. And of course, Darwin did so with racial motives and derogative intentions. During the early 1900s, the social engineering aspect of Darwin's theory became popular worldwide amongst many scientists alike, high-ranking politicians, and it even caught the eye of the elitists, the most powerful globalists to ever exist in modern times. More about this in the second installment concerning this topic, but I mention all of this to inform you that they all played a prominent role in elevating the advancement of eugenics, specifically for the sake of their own race, disguised as if this was for the benefit of all humanity at a cost of whatever they desire. They were religiously following this formula or rule by dubbing it as, quote, survival of the fittest. In other words, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution was merely a way to elevate and escalate the implementation of white supremacy and to eradicate those who were of non-pale complexions, deeming it as survival of the fittest, where those who did not meet their racist criteria, motives, and agendas would suffer from a variety of forms of propaganda that was hypothesized to eliminate the opposing race of people. See, eugenics is literally a modernized pseudoscience that is based merely on racial discrimination and environmental injustice socially, physically, and mentally, but became prosperous still due to its popularity of praises from those who gravitated towards inequality and racial estrangement. Now, with all of that being said, I'm going to use the title of an article that I created back in 2016 that went viral and accumulated 7 million views in 2 months. And nearly every website known to man was copying and pasting my article on their website for views and, of course, ad revenue. And the title is 98% of African Americans are in fact native Indians and are owed millions. Now, you might be saying, well, Dane, what about the other 2%? The other 2% will be the very, very small amount of Africans. Now, of course, I'm about to give you truthful information about this before it somehow disappears from the internet, because this rabbit hole is in fact much deeper than one may assume. Listen closely. On the date of September 25th, 2008, in a statement made before the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs by Representative James P. Morin, on the grounds of the Thomasina E. Jordan Indian Tribes of Virginia Federal Recognition Act, Morin stated, quote, "This is a travesty this committee can correct. The second unique circumstance for Virginia tribes is what they experienced at the hands of the state government during the first half of the 20th century. It has been called a paper genocide. At a time when the federal government granted Native Americans the right to vote, Virginia's elected officials adopted racially hostile laws targeted at those classes of people who did not fit into the dominant white society. The fact that some of Virginia's ruling elite claimed to be blood descendants of Pocahontas in their view meant that no one else in Virginia could make a claim they were Native American and a descendant of Pocahontas' people. With the great hypocrisy, Virginia's ruling elite pushed policies that culminated with the enactment of the Racial Integrity Act of 1924. This act directed state officials and zealots like Walter Pleckler to destroy state and local courthouse records and reclassify in Orwellian fashion all non-whites as colored. It targeted Native Americans with a vengeance, denying Native Americans in Virginia their identity. To call yourself a Native American in Virginia was to risk a jail sentence of up to 1 year. Now, in this statement, he used the term Native American. But the truth is that our identities were changed not from Native American, but from Indian to colored. And they were not only jailing people in Virginia for claiming their true identity, they were killing them by hanging them from a tree, and in more ways than just one that I won't mention, in each state across North America. The biggest bigoted racist white supremacist of them all, and that's including the federal government and all of those who praise this coward's derogative motives and agenda, was none other than Walter Ashby Pleckler.
The Plecker era was truly one of the darkest times for Native people in Virginia. But I think it's critical for us to think about what was the genesis of the ideology that Plecker was a proponent of. And it's really the eugenics movement. The eugenics movement was a pseudo-scientific movement. We say pseudo-scientific today because we find that the science that they were proposing is not what we today would honor as scientific in any way. The eugenics movement has a direct link to the descendants of Charles Darwin. They somehow made the leap to these notions about racial purity. What is best for each race is racial purity. Plecker and his friends convinced the Virginia legislature to adopt very restrictive legislation in 1924. It's called the Racial Integrity Act. With this legislation, it was decreed that there were only two possible categories. One is white, which means a person, you check that you're white if you have white ancestry, Caucasian ancestry, and absolutely nothing else. The other category is everybody else, and that's colored. So this was very hard on Virginia's indigenous community because in a sense it wipes away their identity on paper. Their ability to describe themselves as Indian was not possible in the state of Virginia until 1968, when the U.S. Supreme Court forced Virginia to repeal the law.
Keep in mind that our elder family members' birth certificates were changed multiple times to state colored, Negro, mulatto, Creole, or even black as their classifications of racial identity by way of the federal government systematically. So, the moral of this segment is that you have been lied to by your government, your president and politicians, your school teachers, your public school history programs, your college professors, multiple Out of Africa theory books, and even inadvertently or purposely, people that shares the same hue as you and I. And that's a whole nother story within itself. Now I challenge each and every one of you to seriously research your mother or your grandmother or your great-grandmother's birth certificates. And if it has the letter C or COL dot or colored and every other misclassified title of race that I just mentioned, then at that moment you will know the absolute truth about who you really are. I'm just here to make you think.
Tellingly, these scenes only begin to appear after the arrival of the Mongoloid. Conquest by the Mongoloids would explain why there are no Aborigines in the Americas today.
As long as they were on the reservation, they were Indian. As soon as they left the reservation, for whatever reason, they became free people of color. Then finally they became African Americans, same people. And you could see it in the lifetime of a single individual. This journey, it changes in classification.
Welcome to Real Black Consciousness Forum Podcast. This is Big VG on the check-in. Today's conversation, we're going to talk about some history. We're going to talk about the first Americans. We're going to talk about the original Americans. We're going to talk about the Aborigines. And we're just going to have like conversation about like what direction is this platform going, the Real Black Consciousness Forum Podcast? Like what direction are we going, right? We're going to have that conversation today. And we're going to, of course, we're going to produce a couple of sources. And, like all of our conversations, you can find the sources in the description box, right? You can click on the link. You can read it yourself in its entirety. You can fact check, when you have a conversation about history or whatever, it's always good to get the source from the person. You don't really want to take anybody's word for it. Because, truth be told, the American Negro is in the position that we're in because all we ever did was take folks' word. You know what I'm saying? And then, even with that, my goodness, talking about taking somebody's word, we took the devil's word for it. So whatever the devil say, many of us as American Negroes, we just regurgitate it, right? We don't dig in those crates, right? We don't dig in those libraries. We don't go back and get those older, earlier works that writers and explorers talked about. We just don't do it. But today is a new day. We're learning different things. We're reading different things. We're challenging the status quo, right? We just don't take it like, we got a couple of elders still hanging around to these old stories, right? These stories are outdated, but we holding on. But those stories is not going to last long, right? Here on Real Black Consciousness Forum Podcast, the direction that we go in is based on the comments. The comments is the engine and the fuel to the machine, right? So dig this, right? Going over the comments, there was a brother, and he was a little confused, right? He was like, when I listen to more recent conversations, it sounds like it's a little different, than your older conversations. Like, it's almost sound like you're saying the opposite thing. So, of course, we're not here to confuse anybody. And with that being said, we're just going to, we're going to show up a particular position that we have on this platform. Now, here on Real Black Consciousness Forum Podcast, we have always taught from day one that the original man, the black man, was in the Americas prior to the slave trade and prior to Columbus even finding this place, right? He found the place with a whole bunch of people on it. Dig that, right? When we say that, what tends to happen is that if you listen to our older conversations, right, we're kind of like, a lot of that is geared toward a community that call themselves, we gave them the label, possibly. We call them the Aboriginal community, right? And these are a group of people that says, they're American Negroes. They say that we was always here, which I can connect with, right? But they do something a little different. They take a pivot. And they say that they are the original Indians. And when they say they are the original Indians, they do that in terms of like Red Indian nations. So our people begin to call themselves Cherokee and Choctaw and Chickasaw and Cheyenne and Lakota and, et cetera, et cetera. This is what our people was doing. Now, in a sense, it's like, as we used to say on older conversations, it's look like, it's the Red Indian train is on the move. And it's a bunch of Negroes, American Negroes, they're trying to jump on that train. They're not doing that because this is something to do. What's actually happened is that, you got some voices, some guys, they're like YouTube famous, right? It's a Callaway guy. It's a guy we call Miho here, right? And there's a few others, and they say things such as, when I say they, I mean the Aboriginal community, saying things like the African slave trade never existed, it never happened. right? They say things like that. They say things like, you know, Big Mama said she was Indian, right? They say things like that. They say things like, you know, what else do these guys say? They do this. It's like they do what I call picture scholarship too. They kind of match up these pictures, right, with these ancient like monuments or, but check it out. At the end of it all, this is what's happening. In doing so, it's kind of like our people, they really don't explain to our people their position in this territory in the West that we call the Americas, right? So you can see like maybe it's like maybe 450, maybe 500 red Indian tribes. And if you tell our people that they're Indian and you don't do it properly, they will think that they are the real Indian from a red Indian nation. So now you got American Negroes saying they're the original Cherokee. They're the original Choctaw. They're the original blase, 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 right? And then while they're doing that, they're kind of like, throwing some cold water on the fact that they're mixed with the African. You see what I'm saying? So they minimize the African part of them, and they maximize what I would consider like the red nation, but they're doing it out of error almost. So if you listen to our older conversations, what we do, we try to bring the balance to, because that's what's going on, right? The truth be told, though, is that here on Real Black Consciousness Forum Podcast, we stand on and we show and prove that when it comes to the West, right, the American Negro is found in I'm talking about in large numbers, Central America, South America, and the islands, right? When we talk about the territory that we call the United States, it's California and Florida. Everywhere else is like small pockets, right? We could be found in the Carolinas. We can come all the way down through from Virginia to the Carolinas to Alabama, Tennessee, and then you got Mississippi, Louisiana. And then also, we're going to speak on later about Negroes in Canada. But we're talking about small pockets of people. Now, the thing about it when I say small pockets is that, dig this, the territory that we call the United States was never heavily populated by red people neither. This whole, that's the kind of like the issue I got with Jack Forbes. Like, he's a guy, he's a scholar, but he kind of paints this picture like there's millions and millions of people here. And there never was millions and millions of people in the territory that we call the United States. It just wasn't so, right? There were always pockets of people that was here. So how I see these Aboriginal guys is this. This is kind of like what they do that we totally disagree with on this platform. See, the American Negro was always here. You can't be a Cherokee, in my estimate. You can't be a Choctaw, in my estimate. You can't be none of these red Indian tribes, in my estimate, because you, as the American Negro, was already here before they got here. So how did you become a Cherokee when you was here before them? So in all transparency, like if you listen to, we kind of clown these guys a little bit. Well, we don't kind of, like we clown them a little bit. Like, yo, they running around saying the slave trade never happened, and they talking about, I'm the real Choctaw. And I'm like, yo, you going from one oppressor to another oppressor. Yo, check this out. Let me say it this way, right? Let me say it this way. There was a part in our development as American Negroes when we were Christians, right? And I want to put a time on it, so I'm going to say, let's just say the early 1920s, right? The bulk of our people was converted to Christians, which is a Jewish religion, right? So to some respect, as an American Negro, if your religion is Christianity, you're underneath Jews. You may not see it that way, but you're underneath Jews, right? I don't care what color you make the Jews. You can do that whenever you want to do that. That's your business. But you're underneath Jews, right? Then came like a deeper sense of black consciousness, right? And it started to arise after the 1920s. And we wanted to be closer to self. We wanted to be closer to, like, it was a blackness kind of thing. It was a opening movement that we was kind of like spiritually and soulfully we're changing. in this change, many of our people became Muslims, right? Because we felt that Islam was our truest self, right? Islam is our truest self. And then before you know it, we start, bumping our head on the ground 5 times a day. We start praying to Mecca, you know what I'm saying? We start visiting Mecca. And what actually happened was we went from following these Jewish devils to running behind these Arab devils. And we feel like when we was running behind these Arab devils, we was closer to ourselves. But when you see our people jump from Judaism or Christianity to Arabism or Mohammedanism, that's pretty much what we was doing. And we felt like we was being closer to ourselves. In a sense, that's how I feel like the Aboriginal community is doing. They're not teaching our people that you were here before these Cherokees ever came around. They're not doing that. They're kind of doing something different. They got a different song and dance. Here on Real Black Consciousness Forum podcast, we teach this like, see, the American Negro, if you look at it in a sense, the black man is almost the last person here in the United States, right? It's a weird way we put it, though, because, see, first of all, when we talk about...
Okay. Moors, I think I got this right. I know I got a lot of cutting out going on and all this here business here, but I'm going to see how it's going to come out, and who knows, I don't know. But anyway, I hope y'all got something out of this here podcast, and I'm going to examine it, convert it, YouTube it, and all that if everything is all right. Okay, only if everything all right. But anyway, I've been your host, Tarhaka,